Well, greetings, Imagination Connoisseurs, all of you members of this, the Post-Geek Singularity community. Welcome to Sunday's Robservations live chat number, 206. My God, 206. Robservations is, of course, the show about something. And there's a lot of somethings to talk about today. Let me tell you, including the first complaint I received. Yes, I received a complaint. Via the website, theburnettwork.net, where all of your letters come over the transom. You can also send me complaints. I hadn't received one yet. After 206 episodes, I think that's pretty good. But it's a very good complaint, I have to say, and it's something I felt the need to address. I talked a little bit about this with the Honorable Mayor Mike Bodden, one of our great moderators. He's, of course, the Honorable Mayor of Riverdale, Iowa. He can't be here today because he is at a city council meeting where apparently his constituency can also make complaints. So I figured in honor of Mike not being here, he didn't know. He was like, it's a little hot in here today. And of course, as you know, I just got out of the shower, which brings me to the fact, remember, these shows are brought to you by Lucky Tiger men's grooming products for those men who want to look good and feel great. And if you go to their website at getluckytiger.com and you buy anything, and I highly recommend buying pretty much everything, especially the stuff that you need for your beard or mustache, so you can tell me how it is. Although I did see there's a local restaurant, and there's this guy who has this really great, really neatly trimmed white beard that I found pretty much irresistible. I know. I can have man crushes too. But I think that I want to try and do that again because people liked it when I went for the little facial hair. But anyway, if you buy anything on the Lucky Tiger website, you can punch in PGS when you check out for Post-Geek Singularity, and you will get 25% off your order. And as you know, it is the preseason leading up to the football season this year, and Lucky Tiger is running a giveaway through Labor Day, through next weekend. They're having their Tailgaters giveaway, where they're giving away over $500 worth of tailgating swag in their Tailgaters giveaway, including a grill. So if you want to go to either getluckytiger.com or clubluckytiger.com, you can enter their sweepstakes, actually their giveaway, free of charge, and you can possibly win $500 worth of tailgating merchandise, making you the envy of all of your tailgating friends. By the way, I just want to point out that the Seattle Seahawks, the Jedi Knights of the Pacific Northwest, did win their preseason game against the Chargers yesterday. So good on them. How exciting is that? Anyway, so I'm going to start this chat. I'm just going to start right into it, and I'm going to read the complaint that I received because I want to address it. Now, this complaint comes from a longtime member of the Post-Geek Singularity community and somebody whose letters I've greatly appreciated, his thoughtful letters. And I kind of felt, when somebody complains, I feel bad if I've offended somebody. I think after 205 chats, this being the 206th, it's kind of hard. I can't believe, first of all, I've blabbered on for this long, but it's hard not to offend somebody. But I will say this. One of the things about this channel, whether people write in letters and object to the other letters I read, or they object to me saying something, the entire, as I always say, raison d'etre of this channel is to promote discourse within the fan community, respectful, honest, open-minded discourse that leads to larger discussions. That's what Robservations is all about. That's what the show about something is all about. That's what I'm all about. So I think it's important, having never had a complaint before, to address it head on. And I remind all of you to be as respectful as James M., who wrote this complaint in, was to me. And first of all, I just want to say I appreciate, James, that you wrote in. I very much appreciate the tone of what you had to say, and it did not fall on deaf ears. Mike Bodden and I discussed it, and I thought it was appropriate to answer. So I'm going to read his complaint first. This comes from James M. I feel the great RMB has stepped over the line. In live chat number 205, Rob went deep into his beliefs on the age of the earth and how the Bible is a lie. I understand Rob has tried religion, and I'm glad he tried it. There are many that would not even do that much. I also understand that if I did not want to hear Rob, I do not have to. However, Rob has always said he wants the channel to be a place where people feel comfortable. I am a Christian, And to hear Rob say what he did about my beliefs hurt and made me feel very uncomfortable. I try my best not to get offended over every little thing that is said. However, later in the chat, he said he would stay out of a debate over what? Pineapple pizza? By the way, this is not an invitation to start this up in the chat again. Come on. Are we going to put pineapple pizza to rest? Because this is important. Really, Rob? You say anyone that believes the Bible is dumb, and then you say that you don't want to make a call on pizza topping. Why? Rob has crossed a line I don't think he has before. Well, first of all, James, I do want to apologize. I did not want to come off as seeming like I think that Christianity is a lie. And I am truly sorry that I hurt you and hurt any fellow believers out there. As far as religion is concerned, as everybody knows, because I've talked a lot about this on the show, I was raised a Jew, and I have always been interested in religions of the world. And there are a lot more similarities in all of the religions of the world than there are differences, really. And I think at the end of the day, we can't be sentient beings. We cannot be self-aware with asking the big questions. Who am I? Where did I come from? What is life all about? And I think that's the very basis of religious questions. And indeed, they're not just religious. They're questions about anybody who is self-aware and thinks or talks or wonders about existence. So, and this is a debate that has yet to be answered. I don't know if there ever will be an answer. I don't know if there ever should be an answer, because these existential questions are what drives the human spirit. And yes, I do believe in a human spirit. That said, I will say that I do not believe in a legalistic Christian interpretation of the Bible. I just want to say that I do own a Bible. I have this Bible. This would be the Holy Bible, the New Open Bible. It is the New King James Version. I've even got my name inscribed on it. This is a very expensive Bible, actually. This was given to me in 1990 by a woman named Penelope Foster, when Penelope Foster was an executive production manager and producer that I met at Warner Brothers and worked with at Warner Brothers. And she also was a producer on Free Willy. That's how I ended up working on Free Willy. And there was a time that I went to her church in Van Nuys, the church on the way that was presided over by Pastor Jack Hayford. And I will say this, it was really the only time in my adult life that I spent any length of time in a church. And we would go to Sunday services often because I really enjoyed Jack Hayford's sermons. I thought he had a very interesting way of engaging the audience. He was not so much a fire and brimstone kind of a guy, but he was a very practical-minded man, and I appreciated everything that he had to say. Now, I would like to read you what was Penelope wrote in the front of this Bible. It was presented to me on the 2nd day of November, 1990. Penelope wrote, "My prayer for you is 1 Corinthians 13. My hope for you is John 3:3. My belief in you is Philippians 1:6. In friendship, Penelope Foster." Now, I don't presume to know the great truths. I am a man of science. I tend to believe in science. I've been surrounded by the results of scientific work all my life, including talking to you right now here. And I'm a believer in provable theorems and hypotheses that can be peer-reviewed and tested. And I probably follow along the same lines as Willow Yang. However, everybody in the world is not like that. My biological sister is a devout born-again Christian. She carries her beliefs with her every day. She walks strong with the Lord on a daily basis. And we've had very many spirited debates about religion. And I would never presume to tell her what she believes is wrong or a lie. So I apologize, James, for giving that impression. A lot of the times in these chats, I rely on quick humor. Whether that humor is good or not remains to be seen a lot of the time. But I sincerely apologize. And I do not want to dissuade anybody who do have strong beliefs and they do walk with the Lord to not come here and feel that they are unwelcome, because that is not true. However, I will say this can sometimes be a raucous place, and I've always believed that any belief that you have, the truth can withstand any kind of verbal assaults, whether it's in jest, whether it's in seriousness, whether it's from other religions. And I would hope that all of these chats are taken in the spirit that they are intended. And I would like to keep these chats open for everyone, no matter what they believe. My only request is that everybody here treats everyone else with respect, even though they don't have the same heartfelt beliefs, with one exception, and that's, of course, Star Trek Discovery. No, I'm just kidding. As you well know, I always allow people who don't like Star Trek Discovery to have a platform. Or, I mean, who do like Star Trek Discovery to have a platform. So, James, once again, I am very sorry that I offended you. I hope you don't leave the channel, because I've liked reading your letters, and they have been very thought-provoking, more so than you might even know. Now, that said, I'm going to get to the task at hand. Obviously, yesterday at D23, they dropped footage, a poster, and all kinds of news about the third film in this third trilogy that concludes the Skywalker saga. Hence, it is called The Rise of Skywalker. My God, are we here yet? It's unbelievable. 42 years later, we are rounding out, or finishing off, tying off, as it were, the Skywalker saga. Now, I got a letter from Mr. Kevin Rubio, my friend Kevin Rubio, who, by the way, has written a short film that stars Gigi Edgley, and also Juliet Landau is involved in it. He co-wrote this film called Hashtag. Ben Alpe directed it, and it's been burning up the festival circuit and winning all kinds of awards. It recently played at the Hollyfest Film Festival here in Hollywood. I also want to remind everybody that my own short film that Lucas Kendall wrote and directed, Skyfighter, was picked up by the Dust Multimedia Network, and it will be debuting early next year on Dust. So you'll be able to see Skyfighter. So anyway, Kevin Rubio, Hashtag is his latest work. He, of course, made Troops, the short film, the fan film Troops, which is a parody of Cops, a Star Wars parody of Cops that is generally considered the flashpoint for all modern fan films. First of all, it jumps from basically Ernie Facilius' Hardware Wars to Troops. And Kevin wrote this letter. Kevin had also, for those of you who don't know, Kevin wrote for Dark Horse Comics the hilarious Tag and Bink comic books that was recently republished by Marvel. Tag and Bink are sort of the Rosencrantz and Guildenstern of the Star Wars universe. And there's even a character in the comics based on me, my likeness. Lucas Marion, the artist, drew a character, Manny Bothens. Manny Bothens is, of course, a man, Manuel Bothens. Manuel Bothens was Mon Mothma's lover, and it was Manuel Bothens that actually got the plans for the Death Star 2. A lot of people think that Mon Mothma was saying many Bothans, like there's a race called Bothans, and there was many of them died getting the Death Star 2 information to the rebellion. But as anyone who knows Kevin knows, or who has read Tag and Bink, realizes that the character based on me, Manny Bothens, was actually a dude who died getting the Death Star 2 plans. So that's who Kevin Rubio is. He's written in before. He wrote in a letter after all the information dropped yesterday about the Rise of Skywalker that I thought, ooh, here's something worth sharing. This has got to be a letter I just jump all over. Greetings, Robert. This letter won't be as long as previous ones, but as I sat in my office the other day with your video streaming live in the background and you broached the subject of D23 and the Disney Plus presentation, you juxtaposed your views on The Mandalorian and the current Star Wars trilogy, and how John and Dave seem to have a story planned out while JJ and company didn't have an overarching story. And that got me to thinking, when it comes to this latest trilogy, whose story is this? Whatever you're feeling about the prequel trilogy, there's no denying that it's about the rise and fall of Anakin Skywalker. The original trilogy is unquestionably the story of Luke Skywalker and his journey from simple farm boy to Jedi Knight. But when it comes to the new trilogy, whose story is it? J.J. Abrams said in many press interviews for The Force Awakens that the thing that got him interested in wanting to do the film was that Kathleen Kennedy posed the question, where has Luke been all of this time? Kathleen Kennedy has even gone on to say that these stories, the Star Wars saga, are about the Skywalkers. So, is The Force Awakens Luke's story? He's barely in the first film and he dies in the second one. Is it Finn's story? He's one of the first main characters that we are introduced to in The Force Awakens, a disillusioned trooper for the First Order who joins the rebellion, yet he's kind of relegated to second banana halfway through the film and becomes a B-plot in The Last Jedi. Is it Rey's story? She does seem to be skirting the rim of the classic hero's journey, made famous by Joseph Campbell, but her character doesn't seem to know what she wants. And if she doesn't know how, can the audience get invested? And if she doesn't know, how can the audience get invested in her? Luke clearly states in Star Wars, there's nothing left for me here now. I want to learn the ways of the Force and become a Jedi like my father. And he does. What do we get from Rey? I have to get back to Jakku. Why? I have to find my family. Well, your family's dead and they were nobodies? Yay? But as a viewer, how do I root for this? It can be argued that the theme running through the first two trilogies is redemption. We've been told by Lucasfilm that the saga stories are about the Skywalkers. So maybe this is Kylo's story. I can't speak to this with any expertise simply because I have not seen The Rise of Skywalker. Maybe JJ and company will find a clever way to redeem a guy that kills his father in cold blood. But from my own personal angle, I can't see how to write a way out of that deep hole without it feeling like a contrivance akin to midi-chlorians. In Saturday's D23 panel, J.J. Abrams stated, Leia is really the heart of this story. Really? The character relegated to exposition in The Force Awakens and unconscious in a bed for most of the movie in The Last Jedi is the heart of the story? As you alluded to, Rob, it's all kind of scatterbrained. No direction, no story. And I know it's easy to come in after the fact and point all of this out. Making any movie is hard. Making a great movie is even harder. And even George retconned his stuff as he went. And no one saw Carrie's untimely death, so sometimes in life, you're forced to throw out the plan and start over, or wing it. But I believe that despite the unquestionable monetary success that the new films are having, that's if audiences seem to not be as enthusiastic about the new characters, it's because when all is said and done, they really don't know who these characters are or who they should be rooting for. This letter was brought to you by Lucky Tiger Men's Grooming Products. Lucky Tiger, for men who want to look good and feel great. That's what Kevin wrote. Well, I thought this was a pretty succinct and direct letter that is speaking to a lot of the things that I've felt about the original trilogy. This new sequel trilogy when I first saw The Force Awakens originally back when it first came out. Now, here's the thing. It's very difficult to talk about Star Wars at all without it devolving into some kind of haterade-filled, vitriolic battle royale. I don't know why, but suddenly we just can't talk about Star Wars anymore. It seems to be the most divisive issue of our time lately, especially in fan circles. Now, I tend to look at these things. I look at genre literature when I'm critiquing it as if I'm in a college course, really. You break the stories down. You discuss them and you talk about whether or not now first whether or not they're good stories or bad stories, whether the author was able to convey his points or her points while the story was being told. Is it a good story well told, as Stephen King would ask or say? And forget the fact, I think that a lot of the conversation in Star Wars, I watched a Geeks and Gamers video today, which was a response, and I watch Fandom Menace videos, and I learn a lot. And the Geeks and Gamers video I watched this morning was about the use of Darth Vader's imagery in this new trilogy, and especially in Rise of Skywalker. Well, there was a staunch objection to this. Now, I don't object to that at all because it is the Skywalker story. And I don't think, I mean, Kylo Ren is clearly the leader of a Darth Vader cover band, hence he's wearing a mask, which is also one of my problems with the trilogy as a whole. Why is Kylo Ren wearing a mask? He doesn't seem too concerned about hiding his identity. Darth Vader wore a mask because if he didn't, he would die. That was all part of his breathing apparatus. It helped him speak. It also was a great way to scare people that had never met him before. But there was a practical reason why Vader dressed and looked like Darth Vader. There is no practical reason, at least we don't know yet, why Kylo Ren is wearing a mask. Why does he have a voice changer if people don't want to know who he is? I get it. It's iconography, but it doesn't make a whole lot of sense. And I think that the same way that R2-D2's treatment in the last two films also doesn't make a whole lot of sense. If you are looking for Luke Skywalker, if the whole point of this trilogy, or at least the question that is asked in The Force Awakens, is where did Luke go? If Kathleen Kennedy wanted to know, where has Luke been? What has he been doing? That's the only question she asked. But if that's what she's asking, why isn't R2-D2 at the forefront of this story? Why wasn't, I would say it would have been really interesting if I had made these movies to make BB-8 R2's Padawan. How interesting would it have been to see the development of a relationship between two astromech droids? I mean, at this point, R2-D2 is the Obi-Wan of astromech droids. He's had 6 previous films before The Force Awakens to be a hero. He's seen a lot. He's done a lot. As an astromech droid, he's a grizzled veteran of both the Clone Wars and the Rebellion, participating in the destruction of 2 Death Stars. And yet, he literally has a tarp over him the entire time during The Force Awakens. This, to me, was offensive and bad storytelling. Now, I don't mean to slag off on The Force Awakens, but I think anyone who's a Star Wars fan who has enjoyed R2-D2 as a character for the previous 6 movies, who's watched R2 fly on jets we didn't know he had in Attack of the Clones, or he was able to fix the hyperdrive because he's deft with a hydro spanner, I guess. However he did it, maybe his own onboard hydro spanner. It seemed strange to me that when we were given The Force Awakens, that R2-D2 was another character of the original trilogy folk that were, and the prequel trilogy folk that have been relegated to a position, their second fiddle, second banana. Now, I get it. From a merchandising standpoint, from a money standpoint, adding new characters made sense. From a corporate standpoint, it all made sense. Let's introduce these new characters. But as I said, I think the greatest mistake that Disney Star Wars has made is this idea from a corporate point of view, and whether or not this rumored, well, we have to license the characters from George Lucas. I don't believe that at all. When you're spending $4 billion on something, you're buying it lock, stock, and barrel, unless that had something to do with Fox. And because Fox did still own the distribution rights to the original Star Wars, maybe those characters had to be licensed. I don't know. Whereas Empire and Jedi were owned wholly by Lucasfilm. Star Wars was not. So maybe anybody that appeared in Star Wars had to be licensed. I don't know the ins and outs of that deal. I can't speak to whether or not it was true or not. But it seems to me that the great mistake, on one hand, from a corporate standpoint, it makes sense that you create new characters. The old characters were all in their 60s. How do you get young kids interested in Star Wars if the main characters are all in their 60s, and in the case of Harrison Ford, 70 plus? I get it. I get it 100%. I understand it. But what they should have done, shoulda, coulda, woulda, and me as an armchair quarterback who didn't have $4 billion pressing down on me to prove to shareholders that this was a fine investment. It's easy for me, and it's easy for all of us armchair pundits, all of us YouTubers, as it were, to talk about these things as if we know exactly what should happen. But it seems to me it was a mistake not to make episode 7 all about our original characters. And during that film, all of our new characters were introduced. And as the status of our old characters changed, the new characters would take over. I mean, as it looks like now, I find it interesting that the poster that they released yesterday to celebrate the Rise of Skywalker, it was the second poster released. The first was just the title. This poster had Rey and Kylo fighting with Emperor Palpatine overseeing the whole thing, which is odd considering look at all the other characters that we've been introduced to. Certainly Poe and Finn and Rose and all of where's Leia? If Leia is the heart of the new film, she's not on the poster. I mean, I get it. I understand. The first posters for Revenge and then Return of the Jedi was originally a poster with Luke fighting Vader. And I get all of that. But it just seems a little strange that suddenly they've injected Palpatine into this trilogy and we're getting it. I mean, it all smacks of damage control. And I can understand that. But I'm hoping that we're going to get a great movie. I really do. But I think in this day and age, when our entertainments, when we're watching, my God, yesterday, Netflix out of the blue dropped a trailer for El Camino, the Breaking Bad movie about what happens to Jesse Pinkman after Breaking Bad, the series, is over. We hadn't even had a confirmation that this movie was even real. And they dropped a trailer with Skinny Pete. I mean, this was amazing. So we are living in a time where we are able to demand far more of our entertainments. And the franchise entertainments especially, I think Lord of the Rings really set the tone. And that came, 2001, 2002, and 2003 is when we got Fellowship, Two Towers, and Return of the King. Now, yes, those were based on novels. So the story was very well sketched out. We understood that. While, yes, there's still, I know Tolkien purists are still bitching about, well, there's no Tom Bombadil, and, Gimli said things that Legolas was supposed to say. I get it. And I've got a friend that continually harps on those films, who's a big Tolkien fan. And he's a legalist. He has a legalistic version of Lord of the Rings. But it's impossible to do a direct translation of any book. Whether it's, the Harry Potter books came close, but as I've often said, the first two Christopher Columbus directed Harry Potter movies were movies that were about magic that weren't magical movies because they were slavish recreations of the books. I felt the same way about the Watchmen film. It was a recreation of the comic, but not a great adaptation. So I go back and forth. But to me, it seems strange that I think that all of the acrimony of this new trilogy, all of the acrimony goes down to the fact that it is quite obvious, just like, say, Alias before it, and just like, say, Lost before that or after that, there was no plan. And it seems baffling to me, and I understand why. Because if The Force Awakens didn't work and Disney's investment in Star Wars tanked, they would have been in emergency scramble mode and they wouldn't have been able to justify putting another Star Wars movie into production. Thankfully, for a number of reasons, nostalgia, Star Wars, people were going to go to Force Awakens anyway. And I think we who love Star Wars, I've loved Star Wars a lot, but in my mind, the real Star Wars films that really floated my boat were Star Wars and Empire. I saw Empire first run 26 times in the theater. And I've often said Return of the Jedi was the greatest single disappointment of my cinematic existence. And to this day, that holds true. The most disappointing time I ever spent in a movie theater after watching Star Wars and Empire and immersing myself in Star Wars for, the better part of 6 years from the time Star Wars came out to the time Jedi came out. 6 years passed. And I read everything that I could get my hands on, every book of blueprints. I owned everything. I had every Star Wars figure, every book, anything that was ever made for Star Wars, I owned it all. And when I saw Return of the Jedi, I felt betrayed. I guess I understand that, but I got over it, and I didn't blame anyone. I just felt like I didn't understand. So I mean, I get people's vitriol and anger. There's now decades worth of people that love Star Wars, and we've had decades of Star Wars behind us. But it's baffling to me that this trilogy, like Kevin Rubio so eloquently pointed out, we don't know who these characters are or what they want. And I know everybody comes at me who's staunch defenders of these movies. And by the way, I liked Last Jedi. I liked Last Jedi a great deal more than I liked The Force Awakens, because I really enjoyed the Luke arc in Last Jedi. I thought it was unexpected, and I thought what they were doing was really, really interesting. I thought it would have been much more well served if you'd combined Luke's story from Last Jedi to maybe Han's story and the Ben Solo story in Force Awakens into one movie. I'm surprised someone hasn't done a cut of that already. But anyway, I really wonder. And now, why am I so excited to see Palpatine come back? I mean, what's interesting is I know the nostalgia is there, but if J.J. Abrams can figure out a way to thread this needle and land this project, land this trilogy, and make it interesting and tie it all together, I am dubious that he can do this, because I am not a fan of the films that he's made, and I'm not a fan of him as a writer. I think he's hopelessly relegated to episodic television writing, and I have yet to see a feature film from him that I felt was anything more than mid-level episodic television writing, especially when the age of great TV writing is upon us and we have shows like Breaking Bad. Anyway, that's sort of what I wanted to talk about. I don't know what you guys think about this. I'm sure everybody has a lot perhaps to say. I don't know. Let's see what you're saying out there. Wow, there's a lot. Okay, a lot of super chats are coming in. JB Bonifacio says, Rey can do anything she puts her midichlorians to, but Kylo has the high ground in the episode 9 poster. Is she screwed? Laugh out loud. Well, I think, look, if this trilogy winds up being about the downfall of the Jedi religion and the rise of the Reformation, and speaking even to what James was saying, the New Testament is the revelation, and it is what the Old Testament prophesies coming to pass. And if I could go back to how this chat began, if the Rise of Skywalker is really about a new golden age based on revelation happening, I would dig that. I would think that's pretty incredible. And it doesn't just go back to the hero's journey, but it goes back to human history. And whether here's another thing that I've often said about the Bible. Whether you are a believer or not, the Bible, if you only look at it as literature, is one of the most important books in all of Western civilization. You have to know your Bible if you're going to become a great storyteller. I've often talked about how the story of Job is one of my favorite stories in the world, and I love variations on that theme. I mean, even Robert Heinlein wrote a book called Job. But you have to know, you have to have read, because so many stories are variations on those themes. And if indeed if the Rise of Skywalker really becomes about the end of a belief system, the Jedi and the Sith, if bringing balance to the Force is bringing a revelation to the galaxy, and that's indeed what the Rise of Skywalker is about, get rid of the midichlorians. But if the Force is real, that means not just people that are Force adept, but everybody is a part of the Force. And it would be very interesting to see that if people who are going to be called Skywalkers are everywhere, and that it's possible for everybody to become a Force user, maybe the eternal struggle between the dark side and the light side is really what is shattered in this film, then I would say that's an interesting movie. Now, I want to see that. I don't know if we have enough threads there to make that happen, but I do think whether Kylo JB has the high ground or the low ground, or whether Rey, I don't even understand like how Rey has become our adept force wielder. I would think that Kylo is somebody who trained under the Jedi. I can't understand. It's not just because she has just because somebody is strong in the force doesn't mean they're omnipotent. It just means they have all this potential. It could be untapped for the rest of their lives. Echo Based Network is here. Echo Based Network says, I am a Christian, and I 100% believe in the King James Version of the Bible, that it's true and the word of God written by man. If you think it's a lie, then stand your ground on that. I'm not offended, even though I think it's wrong. No, I don't think the Bible is a lie. I think it's what many different men over the course of hundreds of years compiled with the knowledge they had at the time. I mean, I'll give you an example. During the time of the Bible, or when the Bible was written, there's nothing about DNA in it. Yet DNA is a building block. I mean, if you believe, my grandfather, even though he was a Jew, I think he believed in God. He was a man who believed in intelligent design. And he believed in God, and he always was saying to me, the one thing my grandfather would ever talk to me about is, in terms of religion, was eyeballs. He was so fascinated. He's like, how could sight evolve? He was convinced that there was no way any kind of sight could evolve. It had to have been designed intelligently. And that, for him, was enough to believe in God. And I was never going to tell him I didn't believe that, because I don't know. Maybe he's absolutely right. But I think as more and more of the universe, and certainly the infinitude of the cosmos, once you start looking at the heavens, which really aren't addressed at all in Scripture, because we wouldn't know from our perspective. And remember, it was men who were interpreting the Word of God. We didn't have any understanding of the heavens. We didn't even understand the earth wasn't the center of the universe back then. So even the interpretation of the Word of God, I mean, think about it. If the Judeo-Christian God exists and did create the infinitude of the universe, can you imagine? I mean, how would his word be revealed to a bunch of people that were in the state that humanity was 2,000 years ago? We would be simpletons, and we would only be able to get the word of God the way we understood it. God couldn't talk about the building blocks of amino acids, for instance. So it was revealed to us, if indeed it went the way the Judeo-Christian Bible would say it went. We were given the word of God as we understood it at the time. And I think science has revealed there is a lot more to human existence and indeed the cosmos than we could have even conceived of back in the day, that people were putting pen to parchment and coming up with the word of God as it was revealed at the time. My answer is I don't know. I don't know. I might never know. And I'm not hedging my bets. I'm not going to just say on my deathbed that I'm certainly a believer all of a sudden. I don't know if I'll ever could be. I don't think I'm capable of being a believer the way that, say, my sister is. And the thing about my sister is there's a contentment to her life because of her belief. And that in itself could be metaphorically what the whole point is. I don't know. It's hard to say. But again, it's a discussion I don't really like to get into a lot because it becomes very divisive very quickly. But it is interesting. And I love reading about religion, and I love reading about people's beliefs. Willow Yang is here. Willow Yang says, Emmanuel Ericart and I have buried the hatchet over Hawaiian pizza. We realized that we've got much more in common than we have differences. Well, Willow, I thank you for that. I appreciate you burying the hatchet. And if you're capable of doing it with your intellect, well then, kudos to you. We all can. Emil Johansson says, if I'm an atheist, is it hypocrisy to enjoy Lost? No, not at all. But I think if you're a fan of great storytelling, ultimately it is, because the last season of Lost, to my mind, is a complete betrayal of everybody who invested themselves of the entire series, as I did. But that's just me. Echo Based Network also says, I'm a huge Star Wars fan, and I have zero investment in this new trilogy. I personally do not feel like they honored the original characters. Well, I feel they didn't honor the original characters either, at all. And I think that's a huge problem. I also feel that they didn't honor their new characters by giving their new characters defined as characters. It's all shorthand. And I know a lot of people have grown up. As I've called it on the show, I call it cutscene storytelling. Look, I love video games. I've talked to people how when I played about on the show, I've talked about how when I played the first Uncharted, I felt like for the very first time, I was as involved with the characters and a story as I was in a movie. I was blown away by Uncharted. That was really the first time. Now, I know some people talk about Solid Snake and Metal Gear Solid. That's true too. But I mean, games like Rain or The Last of Us or things like that. Is it Rain? Is it called Rain? There's been some incredible storytelling. And I do think that The Force Awakens was cutscene storytelling. It was bare bones, and it wasn't. I mean, there were moments like with Rey, for instance, they wanted to create these moments that they created with Luke in the original trilogy, but we didn't feel anything. We didn't feel anything because everybody could relate to Luke, and the difference is that Luke was a blue-collar farm boy, just like Han Solo was a blue-collar truck driver. Both guys were workaday dudes, and everybody who saw that movie across the planet understood what it meant to be stuck where you don't want to be, and to look at those twin setting suns of Tatooine and hear the French horns of John Williams compositions and want to leave. We all got that. They tried to do that with Rey in The Force Awakens. They never achieved it, and we never felt it. Now, a lot of people say, oh, yes, I did. Oh, yes, I did. Oh, yes, I did. And I'm not going to take away from those people, but I think in the long run, it was cutscene storytelling, and it wasn't. It was very surfacey, and I agree. I think that I don't think it worked at all. I really don't. Echo Base Network continues on and says, Cobra Kai, I feel, had the perfect blueprint of how to honor old characters while introducing new ones. Couldn't agree with you more. I think Cobra Kai, and I've always said on the show a million times, Creed. Both of those are great examples about how do you go into old franchises and reinvigorate them by honoring old characters and also introducing new characters and new storylines. Absolutely. Alexander Wilson is here. Alexander says, one thing that is concerning is the international box office for Star Wars. It has gone down since Force. Also, Black Panther made more money domestically than The Last Jedi. Can't wait to see what the next box office looks like. Absolutely right. I mean, we will see. Of course, Star Wars has never traveled well in China. And I think Star Wars, in a certain way, it's myth making that's different than, I think, Asian myths. The hero's journey in Asian cultures, as we've seen in many a movie, is a little different than the journey in Star Wars. So I think that's part of the reason. And I think that maybe there could be, I mean, George Lucas, Star Wars was in fact a fusion of Kurosawa movies and Westerns and Flash Gordon serials and all of those things. But it's interesting that they didn't catch on in China. But you're right. It's going to be really interesting to see where people, because I think, people are after Last Jedi, and it's not just the people that didn't like Last Jedi. It's that the world we live in now, we have so many different great entertainments. And of course, I think, believe it or not, that even though the Lord of the Rings saga was actually, I think, a little bit diminished by the Hobbit movies in terms of its stature, the Lord of the Rings movies, the success of that trilogy looms large in the modern day. I do. And what we should have got from this new Star Wars trilogy, with all the information and all the different extended universe stories, the stories that they could have told, they could have fallen back on. It's disappointing that we received Star Wars stories that were not nearly as good as the best stories in the EU. And that's because the way that Hollywood works is that when you're working, movies are the pinnacle. Television is great, but movies are really the pinnacle. I think that's going to be changing we're in the process of that changing, but movies were always the pinnacle of the entertainment business. And people thought, if you're working on a Star Wars movie, if you're given the Star Wars franchise, that's like winning the biggest lottery ever. There was no better movie to work on. There was no better franchise to work on. Unfortunately, I don't think J.J. Abrams was up to the task, certainly not as a writer. And it's interesting. I would be really curious. I think there's a reason why Rinsler's book on the making of The Force Awakens was never released. Rinsler, of course, wrote these coffee table books on the making of Star Wars, the making of Empire, the making of Jedi, his book, The Making of Planet of the Apes, and most recently, just in the last couple of weeks, his book on the making of Alien. All of these books are stunning. They're some of the best books ever written on the making of films. He did write a book on the making of The Force Awakens that was shelved. It has not seen the light of day. Why? Why not? I don't know. But you know what? After you make $2 billion, no one questions you. So, interesting. Now I have another letter. I have a letter from our moderator. It's a quick one, but Terry Flynn is back, and Terry, back from his Grail quest, D'Artagnan, as we like to call him, the D'Artagnan of moderators. Terry is back, and he's also, in addition to moderating, written me a letter. And I like it. Dear Rob, I'm loving your continuing discussion of physical media. Forgive me if this sounds like a repeat of past points, but whilst I agree streaming is largely the future, I disagree that physical media will die. The reason is the sheer lack of broadband availability and diversity. I'll refer you to a past letter where I was amazed that John Campea admitted just how limited his broadband ISP choices were. Just like we proclaimed vinyl to be dead, only for it to live on in an albeit small market, there will always be a geographically defined group of the population for whom streaming services are limited or non-existent. I will agree that the market for physical media will contract. However, it won't disappear. Until broadband is forced by governments to be treated like a basic utility, like water, it won't be provided to everyone by any means. I tend to look at segments of markets rather than markets as a whole. There's definitely a market segment who will buy physical media. Demand creates supply. I don't think Blu-ray will disappear anytime soon. Contract? Yes. Go? No. Kind regards, Terry. Well, as everyone knows, it has been an ongoing debate and discussion about the demise of physical media. I was talking about how yesterday that I think Disney Plus is definitely, or maybe it was on Friday, Disney Plus is definitely a physical media killer. I can see that Disney will, in the next 5 years, they will completely withdraw from physical media altogether. We've basically had physical media for 40 years, little less. But if you had a 3/4 inch deck, believe it or not, you used to be able to. That was the only way you could get pre-recorded tapes in a very small fashion. But basically, I've been buying pre-recorded media and physical media for the last 39 years. And my first tape, as I've told everyone, was Meta before they became Media. Media's version of John Carpenter's Halloween. No, I don't still have it. I got rid of my VHS tapes in 1985. And I was a better man for it. I went Laserdisc only. Although I did have a VCR because I would tape stuff off the screen, off TV. But I think Terry makes a good point. However, physical media sales have dropped between 2014 and 2018 by 50%. 50%. And every year there's a 15% drop. So absolutely, physical media is in precipitous free fall right now. Absolutely, it is. Now, do I think it's going to go away forever? Probably not. Just like what Terry said, there's a lot of places around the world that do not have broadband, that do not have internet access. I do think that, look, if we eventually stop the fires in the Amazon, clean up the Pacific Gyre, and take the plastics out of the ocean, we stop testing nuclear-powered missiles that can explode and put radioactive isotopes all over your own countrymen, as happened. I mean, these are things that are going on in the last couple of weeks. You know, we are not being very good custodians of this planet. So who knows if we're going to be here in another 100 years, or at least be here we'll probably be here, but let's hope it doesn't look like we live in a Fury Road future, because that would suck. But anyway, assuming that we don't, the thing about physical media is it's a lot more expensive to produce than vinyl. Now, I think what's going to happen is the studios, because they're going to create streaming services, are going to get out of the physical media business. Already, Disney doesn't even want to admit that they had Hollywood Pictures that put out R-rated movies. Ruthless People, half of Disney's that catalog has been, not half of their whole catalog, but their R-rated movies that Hollywood Pictures made are being licensed out to people like Kino Lorber. They put out Color of Night, which was a Hollywood film. You still can't get Splash on physical media. And all of those things are going to move over to Disney Plus. They don't want to have to, they'll control everything. I mean, I have to say, what I've seen of Disney Plus is amazing. They've got a Star Wars page. Like I said yesterday, you go to the Star Wars page, there's all the Star Wars content on one page. You can just skip around and watch your favorite clips from any of the Star Wars movies. It's all right there. You don't have to go searching for it. You don't have to look for it. There is a Star Wars page. It's really well done. I mean, I don't understand why, you go look in science fiction, like on Netflix, and there's all these different categories, and like there's secret menus, but I don't understand why Netflix doesn't have like time travel movies and like your favorite, like do pages of things, and they're getting around to it. They've now said that they're going to start, they're going to have to, but because you never know what you're going to find when you go on to Netflix or finding anything. But I think that physical media, the problem is making transfers. I'll give you an example. I do not control my own movie, Free Enterprise. I really want to get control of it. But in order to make a new 4K version of the movie, even to transfer the negative, to do color correction and to transfer the negative and to do a 4K mastering of the film properly, you're looking at, I mean, I could do it cheap for 80 grand, but let's just say you're looking at $100,000 to remaster the film and the sound, probably even more. That's not an insubstantial amount of money. Now, how many, just physical media, could I justify the cost? I want to do a whole new cut of Free Enterprise. I want to call it the Final Frontier cut. It'll be the last. I've never finished Free Enterprise the way I've wanted to finish it. It's been 20 years. The movie's been unavailable since 2006. I mean, you can get an old standard def streaming copy that drives me crazy. It's not even the proper aspect ratio. And you can watch it, but I'd like to do a definitive version. As long as it's 4K, it's pretty much future-proof, because that's pretty much how we see. And if I could have a 4K version, it will live on, but it's expensive. And if you want to go back, yeah, there's going to be existing transfers of movies. And I think that the niche markets like Shout Factory and like Criterion and whether it's Indicator or Mill Creek or these other companies will still be able to put out physical media, but it's still really expensive. Producing a vinyl record is a lot cheaper. It's a lot cheaper when you're mastering only audio than if you're mastering video, because you have to go back to a negative. If you have to go back to a negative, it's a lot more expensive. But I think for the most part, Terry is right. Physical media is going to become a niche market. I don't think it's going to go away entirely, but the fact is people aren't buying physical media anymore. Physical media, I mean, yeah, you have the rural areas where physical media is going to be played, but where are you going to get the players? Are they going to already Oppo, my beloved Oppo, stopped manufacturing Blu-ray players. They made a wicked 4K player. I love my Oppo player that I have. It's only a standard Blu-ray player, but you can't get them anymore. Who is going to manufacture? I mean, they still make my beloved Pioneer. They still make and Panasonic. They make high-end players at around $1,000 if you're an audio and video file, a home theater enthusiast. But who's going to make those and for how long? I mean, even a record player is far more simple to make than a Blu-ray or a 4K player. I mean, yet, look, this week, Apocalypse Now Final Cut is coming out. A 6-disc set is coming out with Apocalypse Now Final Cut and the original theatrical version and Apocalypse Now Redux in 4K, also Hearts of Darkness, and it also comes with Blu-rays. Amazing. One of the releases of the year. My most eagerly awaited 4K release, probably of all time, George Romero's Dawn of the Dead, is coming out from Second Sight. I've been assured that it's going to be out in February 2020. And after that, I mean, I don't even know how interested I am in other than 4K releases, if they're true 4K releases of films, going back and remastering. I don't know how long it's going to last. I really don't. But we'll see. We shall see. You know, what do you guys think? I don't know. I mean, is Disney, I hope we get a 4K box set of all the original Star Wars films. I'd love to see that. Echo Base Network says, thoughts on the racist writer hired for Miss Marvel? Well, I don't know who was hired for Miss Marvel. I haven't read that, and I don't know if they're racist, and I don't know how you define racist. I'd have to look into that and find out more. I just don't know enough to comment. S Beam says, I haven't seen a Rian Johnson movie I liked. Looper was okay. I hope that Knives Out turns out to be good after The Last Jedi. I would not have given him a trilogy. Well, I mean, regardless, if you look at how many movies have made over $1 billion in the whole history of Hollywood, there isn't that many. And I think I have liked Rian Johnson's films since Brick. That was the first movie I saw of his. I liked The Brothers Bloom. I did like Looper, but clearly, I mean, the man does have a vision and he's a deft filmmaker. Was he perhaps the right choice to do Last Jedi? I don't know. I think the biggest problem with this new trilogy is Force Awakens and Last Jedi and Rise of Skywalker should all have been conceived of and written as one piece, written together. And maybe that was the point. Tom Bateman says, Rob, Lost was like getting a 6-year hand job without finishing and then getting a kiss on the forehead. J.J. Abrams' Episode 9 will be just as satisfying. Well, Tom, by the way, it was good to see you, of course, at the 50th Men in Space concert at the Hollywood Bowl. I think that's pretty funny. I wouldn't have quite put it that way, but I don't necessarily think that you're wrong. I would like to believe that you are, but maybe you're not. Maybe you are not. And I do think that Lost, look, I hated the final season of Lost. I was so angry because I was into it, man. I almost dropped it, but then I was into it. And they just didn't know what they were doing. It's like all the characters. None of the characters sat down and said, how have we traveled through time? This is amazing. Like no one ever had. I wanted to see them do one episode where everybody, like they would do a recap episode, but all the characters would try and figure out what is going on. Like they would literally, it would be like a dinner party and they would all be talking to each other. You'd see all these people, instead of a recap, they would just be trying to explain to one another what they think is happening. Like all of these amazingly fantastical things happen, and no one ever had conversations about it. No one ever said, this is amazing. How is this happening? No one ever did that. It drove me crazy. And that kind of writing has been a big part of the J.J. Abrams bunch over there. This is an interesting letter, which I actually like. It comes from Dan Vakura. And I'll read this one. People are going to like this. Hey, Rob, I just wanted to respond to what you said about movie pundits on YouTube not knowing much about movies. I wholeheartedly agree where I held off on saying that in my last letter, since I didn't want to come across as rude after saying that movie pundits don't actually care about representation in film. I missed the Robservation where you showed off your fast color Blu-ray, so saying no one heard of it wasn't accurate. Sorry about that. Anyways, the lack of knowledge has honestly caused me to stop following certain channels. The reviews and discussions just aren't up to par for most of them. There is a channel I used to watch often for years where I genuinely can't watch the reviews anymore. The people just do a very poor job with not only liking contemporary movies while comparing everything to the MCU. I used to be entertained, but I find their reviews to not be up to standard. I do think that also ties into modern education, which you mentioned, where the canon, as one of my old friends would say, isn't being taught anymore. I gave up teaching since I was frustrated with the education system and the administrators who are doing a consistently poor job with a lack of discipline. It used to be that when students got in trouble, parents would discipline their children and ask, why did they do that? Now it has become parents questioning whether their children were in the wrong and wondering what the teachers did to create the situation that caused it. Many parents simply don't parent nowadays, which wasn't a great combination with social media's rise. A couple of my friends say they would not continue teaching in the current landscape if they were closer to the beginning of their careers instead of the end. I read the classics in high school, and I went to a small school with a population of 300 people that was K through 12. That simply doesn't happen anymore, where I taught at a school that just showed the film version of To Kill a Mockingbird up to the trial. Then that part of the book would be taught before finishing up with the movie. I wish I was joking. And certain schools simply don't expect students to finish certain books due to their length. That wasn't the case when I was in high school. Teachers nowadays have lower expectations for students, and content has been dumbed down. English classes have been affected the most in that regard, with the books being assigned to read. I have a friend who said that he doesn't teach current seniors what he taught to sophomores 10 years ago, since it would be too difficult for them, and the curriculum changes don't allow that to happen. It's been a big shift to contemporary works. Research has shown that what students are reading now in high school is easier than what their parents read. Students in college are reading more difficult material than what their parents read, which is creating a wider gap and not preparing students well for college. That is a significant problem. That bleeds into other aspects of life and helps modern movie pundits become focused on mainstream films. They simply don't have the background and knowledge required to delve deep into other films, whether it's foreign films or indie films. I don't think it will get better in the near future and wish things were different. I do appreciate your channel more with the thoughtful topics and analysis, whether I agree with you or not on the subjects. Keep up the great work, and thanks for everything you do. Dan V. Well, Dan, great letter. A fantastic letter. I too, I think my big frustration with modern fandom is how non-three-dimensional it was. When I was growing up, when you were a fan, my love of Star Trek or Star Wars led me into other avenues or other interests. Because of Star Wars, for instance, I found my mother's Beethoven record collection. I mean, all I knew of Beethoven was the beginning of the Fifth Symphony. Dun, 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 dun. I didn't know he wrote a bunch of other symphonies, and what was really interesting was after I started listening to my mom's Beethoven records, the Seventh Symphony in particular, there is a movement of Beethoven's Seventh Symphony that is used quite a bit in science fiction films, or even films that deal with many different films have used a lot of Beethoven's Seventh, and then of course Clockwork Orange famously uses both an original, I guess, a Deutsche Grammophon recording of Beethoven's Ninth, and also Walter Carlos's version of Beethoven. And my interest in genre literature led me to other things. And I feel that we don't have that anymore. I feel that there is no three-dimensionality to education or thought, especially when it comes to genre punditry. I mean, I'll give you an example. There's a book by Sinclair Lewis that I read in high school called Main Street. And it's basically about a woman who, in this town, that wants to change things. And it doesn't, in a nutshell, it doesn't work out the way she wanted it to. Now, this is not a genre novel. It has nothing to do with horror, science fiction, or fantasy. It was written by Sinclair Lewis, one of the great American writers of the mid-century, the mid-20th century, I suppose. And I've thought about this book my whole life, and in a way I've identified with this main character who had these dreams, or knowing that, for instance, what the phrase tilting at windmills means. And that has nothing to do with genre literature. I mean, you could be a Terry Gilliam fan and it might lead you back that way. But I have been disappointed. You read the great film criticism when filmmaking was, I think, at its zenith, when you had the foreign films of the 50s and 60s coming in, and they became, movies were a vibrant part of upper crust culture. And when I say upper crust, I don't necessarily mean rich, but in cities like New York City, the height of American culture, you had the film critics there, and what was happening with the French New Wave or Italian neorealism, or all of these different things that were happening in foreign cinema when Godard was coming out, or Truffaut was coming out, or my beloved Antonioni was putting out films. I mean, they were comparing things to art history, and they were comparing things to literature, and there was just a wide variety of base knowledge that people had when they were critiquing movies. Well, now there is none of that. I shouldn't say there's none of that. That's not fair. But most of the film punditry that I watch, and I do watch a lot of it, is there's not a lot of broad-based knowledge of even the history of Hollywood. It's to me, it's all knowledge of people. It's all home video, and it's mostly mainstream home video, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. But I feel that a lot of the arguments that people make, especially about the Star Wars films, are very shallow. And there's not a lot of understanding. I mean, people talk about, like, I'm not saying you don't have to watch The Hidden Fortress or Seven Samurai or Throne of Blood or Ron or Kagemusha or any of Kurosawa's movies necessarily, but it helps. Like, it helps to understand that tradition. And it's amazing to me as I get older, how little that some of my friends, in terms of their movie knowledge, have actually seen and really delved into film criticism. I remember one of the last things I did with the great John Schnepp was there was a movie bookstore, Movie World, that was in Burbank, and it was floor to ceiling. I mean, full. It's just this old, dusty bookstore that had tens of thousands of books in it. One of the last things I bought was a Pauline Kael tome. It was like, a 2,000-page book of just Pauline Kael's different reviews. And I mean, the things that she cites, she was such a knowledgeable person that you never knew. A lot of her reviews I didn't agree with necessarily, but what she was drawing upon was a vast wealth of knowledge of so many different subjects. And I think now, like you were pointing out, Dan, the fact that why would you show somebody the movie version? I understand that a story, if you watch, look, To Kill a Mockingbird's a great movie. Gregory Peck is great in it. I understand that. It's a great movie. However, it doesn't change the fact when you are reading a novel, the way information is conveyed, the way it seeps into your brain is very different than when you're watching a movie. It's very different, and it's much more personal and I think intimate. The relationships that you have with characters that are drawn well on the printed page, the written word, is very different than the way you develop a relationship with, say, a character in a film. Very, very different. And I think, reading is unbelievably important, and having a vast knowledge of that comes out of, like you said, the fact that the canon literature, it's how can you not read Harper Lee's To Kill a Mockingbird? How can you not sit down and read that book? Because, and what was interesting to me, and I've talked about this a lot on the show, is when I was growing up, even to this day, I got just as excited about the release of books as I did about new movies coming out, because I would go on these jags, like I've often talked about, how I would go to Island Books, which is this little bookstore in Mercer Island, Washington, where I was from, and I knew every single science fiction novel that they had, and I knew every horror novel that they had. Fantasy, I wasn't so much into fantasy, and I would, in the back of these paperback books, I would order these books. If I couldn't find like a Graham Masterton horror novel, like The Djinn, they never had it there. I'm like, can I get it? And I would order it. And then when it would come in, I'm like 11, they'd call me, or 12 or something, and call me at home. And I would take the bus down to Island Books, pick up my little paperback, and I would come running home. And it was like going to see the new Star Wars movie. When I would get a book that I wanted to read, it was a big event. And I would read it and I'd ponder what went on. And you spend a lot more time with a book than you do with a film. And even though I'm a fast reader, it was important. And it worked in tandem. Like you would read, I would read something like, for instance, when Logan's Run came out, I saw the movie before I realized that there was a book, and the book came out in the later 60s. And to read the book Logan's Run, where in the book everyone dies at 21, then it leads you to the 60s counterculture and the idea that don't trust anybody over 30. And it was so born out of the youth rebellion of the late 60s, where that science fiction novel came from. And then you want to learn more about that. So it would lead you to those paths, and you would just get a broader base of knowledge, as I like to call it, three-dimensional thinking. And I think we're taking that away. I mean, you don't need to really ponder these things. If you need to know something, you can just go to Wikipedia and figure out, oh, that's what that is. And then you go away. You don't think about it. But when you read a book, you're given an injection of all kinds of knowledge, not just the point of view that the author is taking, but there's all kinds of information that's being conveyed to you in a novel. I remember reading Stephen King when I started reading Stephen King when I was also 10 years old. He cited a lot of popular music that I hadn't heard, or even songs I had heard, but I didn't know the lyrics to necessarily, and I didn't know these people or whatever, and I would look that up. You're like, what does that mean? Who is this song? And then you'd find out who people were, and then it would lead you down that path. And it was all, growing up as a genre fan in the 70s and the 80s, there was all this incredible music that was coming out, the soundtrack albums, and your interest became, you were like the center of this giant sunflower, and there were all these different petals of things that you liked. And that's how I thought all fans were. And nowadays, I think fans have a lot, and this is not, I'm not trying to pillory people individually. I think it's a function of our modern age. I think what's happening, a lot of it has happened at home, and it's happened in the schools. Because this idea, I mean, when I went to school, the idea that you would ever talk back to a teacher, that a teacher was wrong, or that you would talk back to a parent or an adult, was science fiction. You would never do that. And it's very interesting. I have a theory. I've got my pop culture theory of what's happened to society. And you know what my theory is of what's happened? Bart Simpson. I think somebody's going to go back and they're going to look at the difference between culture pre and post Simpsons, because Bart Simpson was the beginning, I think, of look. There's always been rebellion amongst youth, but I think even when people were rebelling, they were also rebelling against a certain respect they knew they should have for their parents. But the Simpsons sort of flipped the narrative, where it was Bart Simpson and Lisa Simpson that were like, they were the people that everybody was following, and Marge and Homer were kind of the idiots, especially Homer. And that was the thought. I think it permeated. Look, I know this is a crazy thing to think about, but in terms of our pop culture, and then you had like Nickelodeon and Disney shows where kids were the smartest people. I grew up with Leave It to Beaver, even Our Gang. It was always Partridge Family or Brady Bunch. The kids were the ones that were learning because they would do stupid shit, and then they would come home, and their parents were, Mike Brady was like the patriarch, man. He would come home, and Mr. and Mrs. Brady you didn't cross them, or Mrs. Partridge, Reuben, Kincaid. These were authority figures. You didn't go against them, and when kids did something wrong, their parents or their teachers would discipline them, and that's how they would learn. Now we live in a society where kids seem to know best, and parents don't want to offend their children. Oh my God, forbid they're wrong. Well, I grew up in a world where kids were always wrong. We were the ones at fault. And that's why learning was so interesting to me. I was learning how not to be at fault. And the idea that you wouldn't read To Kill a Mockingbird, or you wouldn't read Huck Finn or Tom Sawyer, or you wouldn't read Sinclair Lewis's Main Street. I mean, I read all of these books in school, and they had a profound impact on me. Hell, I still think about a first-year college book I read. I talk about it a lot, called The Hidden Dimension by a guy named Edward T. Hall. I read that, and Man and His Symbols, Carl Jung's Man and His Symbols. I read those books when I was in first year of college, and both of those books had this profound impact on me because they were being taught in this class I was taking called The Making of Meaning. But anyway, I read The Hidden Dimension is all about space, like architectural space, the space that humans inhabit, and why we inhabit those kinds of spaces, and how different human beings treat one another and what we expect of people. And I don't know why, but it was just, again, I never really paid much attention to the spaces that I inhabited until I read Edward Hall's The Hidden Dimension in college. Now, every time I go someplace, especially when I went to Europe for the first time, looking around at cathedrals or going into buildings or things like that, I was always aware of surroundings and to look at architecture in a different way. And that was because I read a book in college, and the more we read, the more you learn. So, Dan, it's disappointing to me, to bring it back to the movie pundit space, that I think a lot of YouTube pundits watch only a certain kind of movie. And I would say that they're more mainstream. Even my horror my horror community, and I have a subset of my friends that are horror fans. A lot of, unless you're older, it happens again, not to pillory everybody, because pop culture, I've always said, it has a 20-year lifespan, as far as if you're younger, and the world has changed. So if you're born, if say you're 30, you didn't grow up where you were time shifting with your VHS machine, trying to look at the scour the TV guide to see if there was a movie they're going to show at 3:00 in the morning that you'd never seen before, that you always wanted to see, whether it was a Hammer horror film, whether it was some obscure 60s science fiction movie, like They Came from Beyond Space, which for some reason I always dug. You come from a different world where all of those things exist. And if all of those things exist, why would you watch things that are anything less than awesome? Like, why would you go back and, like, I tell people, you got to watch Vampire Circus, which is one of my favorite vampire movies. It might be my favorite Hammer horror film. And people are like, what's Hammer horror? Well, Hammer was a movie studio, and they made a lot of these movies. And they shot them all basically in the same house. Well, people go back and watch it, and they're like, I couldn't get past the first 5 minutes. It was so cheesy. Because times are different. Times are different, and we live in a world where movies have become so sophisticated, and they're so expensive, and they're so grand that it's really difficult to go back and watch. So the world has changed, and unless you're getting unless you're being wildly entertained, I mean, hell, reading books is hard. It requires investment of your time. I'm off the weeds here, but I think it's really important, Dan. I think you're absolutely right. I'm totally with you, and I think our civilization is worse because of it. JS says a physical media black market will open up. Well, I grew up with a physical media black market. I was a physical media black marketeer. I used to pay the manager of a theater to let me in, and a projectionist, and I would film the screen, and then I would sell VHS tapes. Get this, $150 a pop. And even though they were terrible, the image was terrible, my bootleg tapes were better than most because I recorded them in stereo. The problem is, you could never do that again. Maybe you could. I mean, maybe people go into movie theaters and film them, but I think after having 4K discs, it's going to be really difficult to see a black market open up for physical media. We shall see. Here is another letter from Kyle A. Dear RMB, hello, Rob. I hope you are having a wonderful day. Today or yesterday, depending on when you are reading this, you made a couple of interesting remarks regarding the current Star Wars saga films and the excitement surrounding them. I was originally just going to make a comment, but then the whole idea sparked me into writing this letter. A lot of people are incredibly excited for The Mandalorian, and many are saying that they are more excited for it than Rise of Skywalker. I can see where they are coming from, because I am very excited for The Mandalorian too, and everything about the show looks incredible. However, I'm still more excited for The Rise of Skywalker, and let me explain why. I believe that The Rise of Skywalker has the potential to be the greatest Star Wars film ever. Yes, better than The Empire Strikes Back. This film will mark the final film where we see the original Star Wars cast. This is Princess Leia's last film. Carrie may not have been able to finish it, but it is through the magic of cinema that her character's story will be able to conclude. At D23, they even said she is the heart of the film. The folks at Lucasfilm have put all the love and care they could into making Episode 9. They have said that this film will conclude the story of the 9 films, which is something unprecedented. I believe that will address many of the issues some had with The Last Jedi. Will we finally get to see Finn and Rey back together, which I found to be my favorite part of The Force Awakens? Will we see an epic lightsaber battle between Rey and Kylo? This film looks like it will be a fitting conclusion to this trilogy. I also think that the lack of hype for this film will be a benefit, because if it's as good as I think it will be, it will pleasantly surprise many. These new Star Wars films have a special place in my heart, as they are really the first Star Wars films that I could experience the hype with. I was in middle school when Disney announced that they were making more Star Wars movies. Some of my fondest high school memories will always be the hype surrounding The Force Awakens and watching The Force Awakens trailer after taking a test. I felt I would be a part of the last generation of Star Wars fans after the Clone Wars, but sure enough, Star Wars lives on. I think there is something that you need to take into account, and it is something that I learned from you by watching your show. We, as members of the Post-Geek Singularity, occupy a small dot within the ever-growing universe known as the movie-going audience. Just like when Captain Marvel was coming out and you said we were underestimating the many young girls and parents and cat-loving or Flurkin-loving people that would go see it, I was right, by the way. Many people are underestimating the young audience who is growing up with these new Star Wars films. There are probably thousands of young boys and girls who do not have access to the internet and cannot speak out their support for characters like Rey, Rose, and even Finn. I understand this because I am part of the generation who grew up with and loved the prequels. I had no idea that people hated those films when I was a kid. Jar Jar was one of my favorite characters and made me laugh, and he still does. The fight on Mustafar I believe to be the greatest fight ever. What I believe we are seeing is more and more defenders of the prequels, and they're becoming present in these channels and forums because those little kids are growing older and have a platform. For every toxic fan that spews hatred, racist, or misogynistic comments against characters, there are hundreds of little boys and girls who see Rey, Finn, Poe, and Rose as their heroes. I won't be surprised in another 20 years when a bunch of these films will spread their love for these movies. I agree. I think you meant to say when a bunch of people, but you said will spread their love for these movies, but you said films. I agree that there may not be the biggest amount of excitement for Episode 9, but don't forget, there's probably a kid somewhere staring up the sky, just like Luke, wondering what their future holds. I was originally going to make this letter in defense of Rey, but I'll save that for another time. Thank you for reading this letter. Sincerely, Kyle A. P.S. Where is that Yoda from that meditates behind you? My favorite part of the show, he is. Well, first of all, Kyle A., fantastic letter. And thank you for writing in. And I think you are 100% right. We tend to forget that, as I say, each generation, every generation has a saga, right? And yeah, there are a lot of people, I've always said, that have come to, and we forget about this. They're my favorite franchises. James Bond is being made now since 1962. We're going to get the 25th James Bond movie next April. And I love the James Bond franchise because when I was a little kid, James Bond came on television and it was an event. Not only did I love the movies, not only did I love James Bond, but the whole way to see them when it was on the ABC Sunday Night Movie, it made it all very special. So the James Bond movies were ingrained in my mind because there was only 3 television stations back then. We had 5 in Seattle. We had an independent station and then our KC. Actually, we had 2 independent stations later and then our PBS affiliate. But nowadays, the James Bond franchise does not live on in young people the way it does in me because of what it meant to me as a kid. So your letter is absolutely something that we always forget, especially old people like myself with one foot in the grave. And you can never be reminded too much how pop culture goes from generation to generation to generation. And it's really important to hear. And I see my objections to, and I think most people's objections to new franchises are really come down to the storytelling in those franchises. A lot of people would say, well, you're not the same age you were. And I think, yes, when you're a child, you have a childlike sense of wonder that has yet to be stripped away from you. And I think a lot of us would say, no, we've never given up our childlike sense of wonder. We were still jaded. I'd say that's true of pretty much me. I got to say, so like, I've been saying this for 8 months now, but I have what I call the Imaginarium, the set that this show is supposed to be on. It's basically in the garage. And I've been in, it's where I have all my bookshelves, and I was basically building a set of all my stuff. And I was going to have multiple cameras and widescreen. I'm still going to do that, but it's been slow going because between all the stuff I've needed like a solid 2 weeks where I could just go through all my stuff. And well, yesterday I was in there because I'm going to try and switch it. And this is a Gundam perfect grade model, This is a 1/60th scale Gundam. It's not RX-78. It's RX-178 mobile suit. Now, this very rudimentary paint job on this, basically, I cheated. It was made very quickly, but it was made in 2013. It had never been really fully, I mean, it had been mostly assembled, but I'd never put the shield together or the beam saber. So this was in my garage. When I was moving stuff around, I looked at this and I'm like, why? I mean, Elizabeth's always like, you have so many cool things. Why, if you can't see them, what's the point? And I walked in and I was looking at this model. I'm like, I've never taken this. It's been lying in this box since 2013, and it's basically finished. I mean, I could detail it more, and it doesn't have all the markings that should go on it. But I mean, come on, I've maintained my childlike sense of wonder. How cool is this? 1/60th scale Gundam perfect grade RX-178. It's badass, right? A lot of people are like, what is that? I don't even know what Gundam is. Let me just tell you, it's a mobile suit, and this is a perfect grade model. This is Gunpla, people, Gunpla. And again, it's been in a box since 2013 and until yesterday. And that's why I have it sitting next to me, because I want to feel its power. But anyway, so Kyle, I think your point is well taken. It is well taken, and we forget this. And we older movie pundits are constantly forgetting that when you are a child, the things that hit you, and we shouldn't forget this, because whether you're talking about He-Man or G.I. Joe, or in my case, Bond or Star Trek or whatever, I have said intellectually, I understand that Star Trek Discovery is going to be the first Star Trek people see. And other viewers like Emmy, who has written impassioned letters about it, I understand. She's an older fan that really appreciates the show. She's not a kid by any stretch of the imagination, but she has written eloquent letters about Star Trek. And I think that we can never take away what people like. You can't tell somebody that what they like is not good. I'm not going to tell somebody. I mean, I think it's weird that fandom is, people have been told, yeah, you can't like Last Jedi. It's trash. Everybody, I hear that every day. Every day that Last Jedi is trash. It's certainly not trash. The Last Jedi is certainly not trash. It's beautifully made. The scene in the throne room, Snoke's control room, whatever you want to call it. Come on, that scene, not just in science fiction movies, that's one of the great battle scenes in a film in terms of its design, its execution. I mean, I don't think it means very much, but from a story standpoint, why are we doing this at this point in time? But it certainly is a beautifully made scene. So we tend to forget that everybody likes different things. The point is, and the thing that we should remember, is that we're all imagination connoisseurs. And while someone might not like the prequel trilogy as much as the original trilogy, there are some people like yourself, Kyle, who loved it growing up. And as you said, you love Jar Jar Binks. He made you laugh. I will never want to take that away from you, and nor should you let anyone else. And I hope you're right. I hope you're right, Kyle. I hope that Rise of Skywalker really sticks the landing, really blows us all away. As much as I find J.J. Abrams to be a mediocre director and a mediocre writer, I am pulling for him. I want him to stick the landing. I want him to make the world a better place through a great Star Wars movie. I really, really do. And I want to thank you for writing in. And yeah, you give me hope, man. You give me hope. The next generation coming up, making the world a better place. Gen Z, I guess you want to call it that. I don't know. Are you Gen Z? Here's another letter. I mean, I'm telling you, James M. James M's writing in again. James M, who sent me a complaint, but James M did write another letter, and I want to thank him. He's continuing, even though he complains, he continues to participate, and I very much appreciate that. James M writes, I have a question about Superman. Superman stands for three things, but only one of those is undefined. That one being the American way. What in the United States of America does this mean? Does it mean the left, the right, the middle, combination? How can anyone write for a character without knowing what the character even stands for? P.S. Nothing beats Canadian bacon and pineapple pizza with Utz potato chips. By the way, a Hawaiian pizza has onions on it, so there's a big difference. I hate onions on pizza. Oh, man, James. Oh, no. Oh, no. Willow. Oh, no. Oh, no. I don't know what to say. Yeah. Well, James, good question. I don't know necessarily. Uh-oh. Did Oh, I guess people. I was going to say Kevin Rubio was calling me. I'm wondering if people can hear me or not. My computer hasn't frozen. I don't think. So yeah, that's an interesting question. Truth, justice, and the American way. You know, I think obviously Superman was created by the son of immigrants in America, Jewish immigrants. And what does truth, justice, and the American way mean? Well, what is the American way? I think certainly the American way is not defined by the right or the left or centrists. I think part of the American way is that all of those people can be Americans. And I think that the American way really goes back to we the people. We the people, or as Kirk would say, we the people, in order to form a more perfect union, establish trust, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for a common defense, whatever. Look, maybe Kevin Rubio sent me a message, and I will see what Kevin Rubio is sending me so I can look and find out. I just have an answer for James. Oh, James has an answer. Kevin Rubio has an answer for James. That's good. My answer, I'm going to wait for Kevin. So if Kevin is going to elaborate, I would say yes. He should elaborate. But I think that the American way is ultimately the idea of America for all of its problems. I would say that the Bill of Rights is the American way. That's I guess what it would have to be, the United States Bill of Rights. It's the preamble, right? Or something like that. That's what Superman is standing for. And I think when Siegel and Schuster wrote that, America was considered a beacon around the world as a place where all people could come and start over and make a new life. And that's kind of what it was all about. And I don't think back then we didn't have the left and the right and the middle, or a combination the way we do now, even though there were certainly, it was very acrimonious. Remember, Lincoln was a Republican and the Democrats were not happy with him. So America was, I guess it still is. I've always believed that the truth, justice, and the American way is that we stand for the rights of all people. And I don't think, at least in a perfect world, we would. But I will wait I'll see what Kevin Rubio has to say about that. He's writing. Kevin Rubio is elaborating, the man who wrote the article that started this chat, which I think is pretty good. So we shall see. Now here's another letter. This comes from somebody who's been quite controversial here at the old Burnettwork on Robservations. And this is another letter from Franz M. Franz M is on deck. Kevin Rubio is coming back to me. Here's what Kevin Rubio has to say. The phrase, the American way, is a byproduct of the Superman television show of the 50s. This was during the McCarthy era, the Red Scare era, when comic books were being attacked, as were people's freedoms of expression, by Congress calling into question everyone's patriotism. That is very interesting. I should just continue talking until Kevin finishes that thought. That's pretty interesting. The phrase the American way was simply a poetic shortcut to say that the viewing audience, Superman, is not a commie. Wow. There you go. I didn't know that. So Superman is not a commie. That's the American way. How interesting. I didn't know that. Here we go. Franz M. Franz M is writing, and I'm sure, once again, people, the political waters are going to get choppy. Detective Jim, here you go, son. Am I a social justice warrior? This comes from Franz M. In a sense, absolutely. Definition: a term for an individual who promotes socially liberal views, including feminism, civil rights, and multiculturalism. That's me. It is also used more commonly now to describe those who essentially push progressive ideals to an illogical degree, such as third wave feminism and identity politics, which I personally believe could be regressive depending on how far it goes, meaning essentially that they are illiberal ideas which will put society in reverse and represent a backwards progression. I don't disagree. In this case, social justice warrior functions more like a description than an insult thrown out like candy to all of those who disagree with political positions, and not at all comparable with how certain social justice warriors misuse the term racist, which is just discriminatory views or behaviors or prejudice motivated solely by the race of another person, and does not at all describe some 99% of the opposition to social justice, whether I agree with it or not. Living life in a wheelchair has a way of making things more interesting. I'm always interested to see how people react to my visible disability. In other words, my wheelchair. In general, I have to say most people react well to it. When I happen to catch someone staring at me, it's usually small children who look kind of curious, as though they've never seen a wheelchair before. This reaction is perfectly understandable to me, especially from little kids. Occasionally, I get reactions very different from the one I just described, from both children and adults, like a fearful one. This is the kind of reaction I received from a mother and her child when I ventured out to the bookstore today, which I have just returned from. I simply smiled at the kid, and he ran to his mother, tugged on her dress, and pointed at me. She picked him up, looked at me with a fearful look, and hurried from my view. Only two things could have caused such a response. Either my wheelchair or my smile is more hideous than I remember. I would be sympathetic if it had been only the child that reacted this way, but the mother was just plain ignorant, and her actions were inexcusable. I felt like saying, "Keep calm, people. It's only a wheelchair. It can't hurt you." Actually, I should just print that off and hang it to the side of the chair and see how many people freak out on it. It's a wheelchair, not a bomb, and it's not a motherfucking James Bond wheelchair, although it would be nice if it was. Get over it. I just finished reading Goldfinger by Ian Fleming, the 7th volume in a classic novel series that detail the world-famous exploits of British secret agent 007, otherwise known as James Bond. The novel has the same plot as its movie adaptation, which is arguably more famous than the book ever was. Bond has to stop the dastardly Auric Goldfinger from stealing all of the billions in Fort Knox and using the money to finance anti-American spy interests. To someone completely unfamiliar to spy novels, this concept might seem breathtaking, just as the back cover claims. But to an experienced reader, the plot is rather typical and unexceptional in any way. For a classic novel such as Goldfinger, a description like typical is actually more compliment than insult, since classics are, by definition, made up of what we know. Calling a classic typical is really just a way of admitting the extent that certain elements of it have invaded pop consciousness. There are many typical James Bond elements in this story. Some work and some don't, but all of them are classic. Thinking about what doesn't work, the villain's method of killing James Bond is always comical. We get the famous, "Here's how we're going to punish you," with the slowly rotating saw moving at 1 centimeter per minute. "Now excuse me while I leave the room, Mr. Bond, to serve myself a cup of tea." The villains attempting to do the killing are typically cartoonish James Bond bad guys, with a smirk worthy of names such as Oddjob and Pussy Galore. You'll find no evidence of morally gray, complex characters here, not even among the good guys. But at least James Bond will take a moment to reflect on somebody he just killed while sipping his morning booze. And at least James Bond knows how to kill. The prose is worthy of neither praise nor condemnation. Ian Fleming efficiently tells this story, which I suppose is all I have a right to expect, but I expected more anyway. I have no specific criticism of the way it was written, other than the writing was standard, which I found disappointing. That doesn't mean I found it boring, though. Goldfinger is a thriller that successfully managed to thrill. Nearly every chapter ended in a plot twist, and this kept me happily engaged for the couple of hours it took to read it cover to cover. I should add, though, the lengthy and completely unnecessary descriptions of golfing at the beginning wasn't a high point. Don't tell that to my mother. Golf is a religion in our family. Goldfinger just doesn't have the sexiness of car chases. The book is most fascinating as a document that reflects the sexism and racism of a mostly vanished era. An era where, for example, Koreans are genetically more cruel and lesbianism is an unfortunate but predictable outcome of allowing women to vote. These ideas are so ludicrous that they would be genuinely laughable, but for the fact that I know of people who earnestly believe both of these things. Overall, Goldfinger was a decent book that has aged reasonably well. It managed to entertain me and make me feel better about how far most of society has progressed in such a short time. I'll probably read another Bond novel if I have nothing better to do. For this post, you could accurately call me a social justice warrior. What I found far more troubling than any label is a post I subsequently read wherein Goldfinger happened to be listed in a 25 books that should be banned post. Just insane. Essentially, the top 20 non-social justice warriors books you should burn. I don't agree with every viewpoint expressed in these books, but that doesn't matter. As an atheist, I'm telling you that the Bible's impact is so profound that no in-depth examination of classic literature should be considered complete without reading it. You cannot even understand Shakespeare, the foundation of all modern English language fiction, without reading the Bible. To willfully not read the Bible is to be intentionally ignorant and to attempt to spread that ignorance and dissuade others from reading it merely because you personally find some of its content morally outdated, that it is a shamefully anti-intellectual thing indeed. This seems like cancel culture, perniciously evil to society in that it is lazy and supplants the need for free thought and rigorous debate, which is the life's blood of any healthy society. It allows you to use the baton of moral superiority without adhering to or even sometimes defending a morality of your own, to quell the moral right of others to simply exist in opposition to you. Consequently, the moral superiority is unmoored and unaffected by the trappings of logic and reason, which take effort to sustain, and is allowed to gradually mutate itself on the inexorable pressure of an emotional whim. This is a malevolence disguised as benevolence, which will lead to, quote, liberals banning music, movies, TV, indeed everything that makes life worth living, because they are unquestionably morally superior in trying to because they are unquestionably morally superior in trying to rid the world of emotional harm. Since everyone is emotionally harmed by something, and then in the absence of something will feel the need to conjure up something for the sake of conflict and therefore meaning, the ultimate and final solution to this problem is that in order to rid the world of emotional pain, we must rid the world of ourselves. The only rational response to this logic is fuck that. Remember, the one reason of many I said I loved you, Rob, well, essentially you bring everyone together to give everyone a voice. Nobody can just delete the morons, which is dangerously a narrow-minded thing to do, and I would counsel against it. Bones, bacteria, and bricks all get stronger when pushed against in some way. Having to face resistance triggers the need to get stronger. It's an annoying cliche, but it truly is when you have to fight back that you really know and develop who you are. When you delete someone, if they disagree, you are insulating yourself from the necessary resistance it takes to find and keep that strong sense of self. It may seem like positive reinforcement to only be surrounded by like-minded people, but it's boring and it's unrealistic. The world is a diverse place, and it is so for a reason. Monocrop cultures produce far sparser yields and for fewer harvest seasons than varied species growing systems. Separating into politically, culturally, or socially homogeneous clumps not only weakens one's sense about oneself, but simultaneously creates the illusion that the whole world agrees with your views. This is the perfect petri dish for dangerous polarization, like the USA is in the midst of politically right now. When you stop talking to the other side, you stop knowing how to talk to the other, creating a mob mentality environment in which the only thing left is, for example, trump tactics of brute force threats and grade school mockery. Consensus, even the appearance of such, is a powerful silencer of dissent, and in your flight for freedom from disagreements, you end up creating a prison. Let's value each other enough to be willing to not leave the table the moment a dish we happen to not prefer is served, and reserve the hatred for serious infractions, not differing points of view. Good friends and supportive relationships are hard enough to find, especially if you're a geek. Let's look for ways to build bridges rather than single material fortresses with only one way in and fewer ways out. Well, Franz, for somebody who's a controversial lightning rod here, I would say that is a pretty spectacular letter. And I want to thank you for that. And for the most part, I think I agree with you 100%. That's one of the things I've liked. I mean, it was funny when I was growing up, I learned from people who had dissenting points of view. It's always been strange to me to think that if we don't agree, we yell and scream at each other, because as many people would say, I think that I think monetarily it's always probably important to be conservative. I don't know. I've always been bad with my finances, but because you know, there's all these wonderful collectibles to buy. I made a movie about my irresponsibility, but anyway, I think that was a good letter, and I really appreciated that. And I think you're absolutely right. I mean, you read a book like Goldfinger, and the same is true of movies. I mean, people would go and Breakfast at Tiffany's. Andy Rooney's Asian caricature character is pretty indefensible. I mean, I understand why he exists, but it's indefensible. But I wouldn't want to see Breakfast at Tiffany go away forever. Breakfast at Tiffany should linger on, and it should be allowed to exist. I don't know. Maybe Willow Yang could speak to that more, or Jeffrey Mao. But I like that. I thought that was interesting. I don't necessarily disagree with you at all, and I like that letter. I appreciate how you said it. And what's interesting is it all kind of feeds into this sort of what we're thinking about in terms of The Last Jedi and Star Wars and all of those things. Now, here's another letter. It's a little difficult to read, but it's a quick one. This is from Martin Lawrence. But I like it. It's a quick one. Martin Lawrence says, "Greetings and salutations, Rob. I wanted to weigh in on the topic of going back to view stop motion after being spoiled by the likes of Jurassic Park. I was born in 1977 and grew up on a diet of Ray Harryhausen and Roger Corman. Times have changed and special effects are mind-blowing, but I can still go back to B-movie cheese like Space Invaders and Reptilicus. Q, the winged serpent, still holds up today. Rest in peace, Larry Cohen. I always prefer a practical effect like Rick Baker's werewolf to the ghastly, fluffy monstrosities we got in Twilight. And a quick side note, I'm from the UK, and pineapple on pizza is a blight on humanity. I would rather have a hobo's underpants draped across my pizza than have it besmirched by pineapple." Yeesh, Martin. A hobo's underpants draped across my pizza. That is that's a cheese I wouldn't want to come anywhere near. Let me just tell you. Thanks for writing in. I really appreciate that. But again, I think that you grew up in a time where you could see, look, I mean, Roger Corman, Pit and the Pendulum, his Corman adaptation. Corman was adapting Edgar Allan Poe, The Mask of Red Death. I'm glad that you could see those things and find value in them. I think that's really, really important. And I think more people should be that way. I think there's a lot of joy to be found in these things. And I think you put it quite well. And I'm glad that you can still go back and look at these things and enjoy them for what they are, because I think it's really important. Look, I tell people all the time that they should go back and watch things like The Devil Rides Out, or they should watch Vampire Circus, or the Karnstein Vampire Trilogy from Hammer, Lust, or what is it? The Vampire Hunter, the Vampire Lovers, Twins of Evil, or the Vampire Lovers, Twins of Evil, and no, it's the Vampire Lovers, Lust for a Vampire, and Twins of Evil. That's the proper order. That's the Karnstein Vampire Trilogy. I mean, people would say to me now it's a little puerile. And of course, the Hammer films were obsessed with having boobs in movies because at the time you couldn't have a lot of boobs in movies, and they put the boobs in the movies. And I, as a young man who was weaned on boobs and loves boobs, and even to this day really appreciates great boobs in movies, I did appreciate the fact that Hammer films always delved into that and gave us a little, lesbian vampires, all that stuff. Not as much as, say, Jean Rollin did in his lesbian vampire oeuvre, but still, I think people are missing out by not watching these movies. I mean, it's tough. I admit it. It's tough to go back and watch Jean Rollin movies. It's tough to go back and watch Hammer movies. It's hard to go back and watch some of the old school Laser Blast, the great Dave Allen doing the alien creatures in Laser Blast. I mean, it's really hard to go back and look at these things and find joy in them. I mean, as I've talked about, even Disney's Song of the South was theatrically re-released in 1986. I mean, I guess that's different. That's all part of cancel culture now. But I think the evolution of our culture, the way it's documented in our pop culture, is really important. And it matters. And it means something. And I would hate to think that eventually no one will see value in any of it. And it won't be watched at all. And I think that, one of the great joys of being a kid was discovering there was something to be said for the forbidden. When you can go to Pornhub and satisfy any fetish you may have, you can see all kinds of hardcore pornography. It might seem silly if you take delight in the presence of one bare boob in a vampire movie made in the late 60s. But I mean, I still think there's a certain charm there. And maybe we should have our young boys watch the Karnstein vampire trilogy instead and get them offline for a while, or hold them off from getting online. I don't know. It makes me sad. Like we talked about movie punditry and how a lot of movie pundits, especially who talk about fantasy films, don't have much knowledge before Star Wars, and horror fans, kind of the demarcation point is in fact Texas Chainsaw, and maybe people will talk about Peeping Tom and Psycho, but it's kind of sad that we have such a rich, vibrant history that might not be as politically correct as you'd hope, but it really showed where we came from, where we were, and it showed the process of where we are now. So I want to thank you. And I really have to say that Hobo's Underpants Draped Across Pizza is an image I will not soon forget. So thank you for sending that in. Cardinal Sin says, anybody watching the Inquisition this evening? Cardinal Sin, I don't know what that is. Is the Inquisition happening? Is that another Democratic debate? I don't know. I'm not sure what you're referring to. Is the Inquisition a movie? Is it something I don't know? I don't know. Are we? I don't know if I am. We shall see. I don't know. Well, everyone, that brings me to the last of the letters today, and I think I'm going to bring an end to this chat. It's been a nice chat. It's been a good chat, a little political, which I didn't mind. It all kind of worked together. But I think, for the most part, we can have political debate or discussion and bring up these issues and not have them devolve into name calling. At least I don't know. You might be talking about pineapple pizza here in the old chat. Koba says the Spanish Inquisition, because I wasn't expecting that. That's very funny. Anyway, I just want to thank everybody for being here. First and foremost, I want to thank my moderators. I want to thank the D'Artagnan of moderators, Terry Flynn, for coming back from his Grail quest and rejoining the Post-Geek Singularity as a moderator. Detective Jim, who I wonder how he's doing with getting his passport. So he will be in London on April 2nd and 3rd to see Bond 25 with all of us. I don't know if Greg Smith is here. I think Greg and the Honorable Mike Bodden are not. But we have this great moderating staff, and I want to thank them because they make this place, they keep it from falling apart and devolving into the Lord of the Flies here, our little island of Imagination Connoisseurs. So thank them. And if you like these chats, please hit like, please share, please subscribe, please comment, please send letters to the Burnettwork.net website. If you want to support the channel, you can support the channel there. You can support the channel. I still have a Patreon up, but I'm trying to dissuade people from doing that. There's going to be a lot of new stuff coming down the pike. Now that I've done this for 200 episodes plus, I'm going to change it up a little bit. I really want to get into the Imaginarium, which is much more interesting backdrop. I mean, it'll take you guys years to figure out what's behind me. And I'll have more cameras and be able to switch in between things. It'll be really cool. It'll be fun. But we'll continue on with these chats because they're still fun for me. But again, I want to thank all of our great letter writers. Again, you are sending in some great letters. When they come over the transom, I am always touched and amazed by the quality of the discussion that we keep going here at the Burnettwork. So thank you for that. Robservations really is the show about something. But anyway, I bring this to an end, bring this chat to an end. Robservations number 206. My God, Robservations show about something. It's obviously brought to you by Lucky Tiger Men's Grooming Products for those men who want to look good and feel great. If you go to their website, getluckytiger.com, you can buy stuff and punch in PGS for Post-Geek Singularity and get 20% off your order. They are still having their Tailgaters giveaway. They're giving over $500 of tailgating swag away if you win their giveaway. And all you have to do to enter is go to either clubluckytiger.com or getluckytiger.com, and you might have yourself a brand new grill and be the envy of your tailgaters or fellow tailgaters or anybody that's involved in this year's football season. But anyway, I want to say thank you once again. And remember, every person you meet has a story to tell you have yet to hear. All you have to do is listen. And with that, I say to everyone, and I mean it, have a better day.